Hi and welcome to this video, and hopefully you can see quite a lot of work has actually happened. So if we look from this camera here, we can see that the air filter's back on, the fuel pipes are on, the connections are all back on to the injectors, the throttle body's there, back on, also the EGR Cooler is on, the wiring is now done to the front of the engine with dipstick in, and also the vacuum pipe is back on. Not vacuum pipe, the vacuum pump is back on. So quite a lot's happened this week, which is good, and I'm hoping that within the next 2 or 3 videos I should be at the point of actually turning the key and hopefully it comes to life and it's all happy. Time will tell. So yeah, hopefully you're enjoying this content, and if you could like and subscribe, if you are, that would be much appreciated, and have a good weekend. Thank you. So we start by refitting the high pressure fuel pipes, which technically should be replaced. So we just have a few photos here just to remind ourselves how things looked before I started taking everything apart. So there's our fuel accumulator rail, which we're going to be connecting back to now. So that's how things should look once we've finished. So I'll just get my rails now and to make sure they're in order. I did mark them 1, 2, 3 and 4, as can be seen there. So what I'm going to just do is take the plastic caps off. So I did put a few little dust caps on there just to prevent the ingress of any dirt. So we just get those out of the way, and then what I'll do is I'll just lower the pipes down and just make sure they're in the right location, and then I'm going to hand tighten them onto the actual injectors, which as you can see are loose. So I'll just tighten those up by hand, and that way the pipe work should be in the correct position when I actually come to start tightening things up for real. And then I'll do the same on the other side there. So this is for injectors 1 and 2. Like I say, it might be back the other way if you're on a Peugeot, because they number them from the flywheel as number 1. So those are all just hand tight now, so they're all lined up. So I'll tighten those at the back. So that's a 17mm crow's foot, and we've got to torque it to 24 newton meters and then 26. Not quite sure why, just only difference of 2. I'm going to do it twice, but there we are. So obviously with a crow's foot, always make sure it's at 90 degrees to the head, and not pointing straight ahead, otherwise you'll effectively lengthen the torque wrench, which will mean you'll actually be over tightening it. So I'm just checking there, making sure it's exactly 90 degrees or right angles. So I just turn it until I get my click. Just keep checking that all the time. So this is the first tightening. So it does seem quite unusual that there's a second tightening of just 2 newton meters more. Perhaps that's more to do with if you've got new pipes, which technically you should be using. Though I have heard many stories of people saying they reuse the pipes and not an issue. So perhaps they're just covering themselves by saying new pipes are safer. I suppose you do have to cover yourselves today, because obviously if they started spraying diesel out all over the back of the engine and onto an exhaust, it'd be a bit of a fire hazard. So right, I'm going to do the injectors now, and they're 4 newton meters initially and a 7mm hex key. Now I'm using a small slim one that will actually get in there, because there's not a lot of space there to get that in. As you can see there, between the inlet manifold, it is quite tight. So I'm just trying to do it evenly at first, just to bring it up, and then finish with the 4 Newton meters. So 4 Newton meters obviously is not very tight at all. So that is sort of very gentle, really, 4 Newton meters. It's very difficult to measure that because most torque wrenches obviously don't go down to 4. This one here I'm using is obviously 4 to 20, which I used to have when I used to have my bike, useful for the handlebars. Okay, so then what we've got to do is do an angle tighten now of 65 degrees. Now, I haven't actually got a tool for that, so I'm going to try and use this sort of protractor here and look where it's pointing to, and basically then turn the T-handle to that same point. Like that. So if I just line it up, I can see where it's pointing to, so as long as I sort of turn it to the same spot, I should be getting my 65 degrees or thereabouts. Obviously not the most accurate method that I'm using there, but presumably this is just to compress that copper washer at the bottom of the injector to hopefully give it a nice tight seal. Right, so that's that done. So then I can go now onto a 14mm crow's foot and tighten the ones onto the injectors, the unions. And again, it's doing it twice. So the first time, like I say, so this is the 25 Newton meter stage 1 torquing. Again, checking that it's at right angles to the head. And then obviously I've just got to go over those again with another 2 Newton meters added, taking it to 27 Newton meters. All pretty precise stuff, this. So let's just hope there's no leaks when I actually come to start the engine, because obviously the pressure on these pipes is quite high and it would spray a bit of a mist out. Right then, so now on to refitting the EGR cooler. And we'll just have a couple of photos here just to refresh ourselves what the EGR cooler looked like. And there it is in its original position. So obviously we need things to go back looking the same. Right then, so what I'm going to do is the spring clips, I think they're slightly bent out. Again, these probably should be new ones. So I'm just going to bend those down so hopefully when I push it together, the top piece will spring onto that clip at this side. And then I'll do the same again for this pipe. Just gently, obviously you have to be very gentle because that could obviously snap off if you wiggled it backwards and forwards too much, which would be a bit disastrous. So let's get our bracket in position first. So for that we need an 8mm socket for the screw and 10mm socket for the nut. So we just get the screw in first, that's for the bracket. So that went in okay. Well, I did actually have a problem with the nut. I managed to drop it. It took about half an hour to find, because it sort of lodged itself at the back of the engine and the subframe. Okay, so there's our EGR cooler that's all being cleaned out. So hopefully this engine should be able to breathe quite nicely once it's all back together. Right, so we've got that in position. So what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of red rubber grease on. I think I put a little bit too much on there really. I just wanted enough just to help the pipes slide on. So here's my nut I'm just about to lose.
Oh, shh.
stupid.
Yeah, so that was a bit frustrating, that. So couldn't initially find the nuts, so we'll carry on as if everything's normal and fine. Get these pipes back on, a bit of huffing and puffing there. Losing a nut is really quite frustrating. Okay, so we'll just pop these together. That seems to be on. I'm just going to tap it down, make sure it's definitely on there. And then obviously the coolant pipes to the jacket of the EGR valve, get those on. So like I said, there was quite a bit of movement there. As you can see there, I don't think they'll come off, but I probably did put a bit too much red rubber grease on that. So now we found the nut again. So it's a 10mm socket for this. And I got it on there by hand first. Because obviously this is the one that actually holds the EGR cooler itself onto the bracket. There we go. So then we just got to go to that pipe. So again, I'm just going to put a little bit of red rubber grease on there to try and protect that O-ring as it goes in. So for this, it's a Torx 30 driver for those two like self-tapping screws that go into the plastic of the manifold. We'll just pop those in. Like I say, all this is all now been decarbonised, so hopefully the engine should breathe quite nicely. So we just pop that spring clip on there on the pipe, and that is the EGR valve, hopefully all nicely fitted now, finished at the back of the engine. Alright then, so now we can refit the fuel return pipes and the electrical connectors. Okay, so we'll put this little plastic bracket back on. So that's where the primer pump sits. And we'll just get these screws out. So there's 3 of those for the wiring sort of harness there. So I'm just going to seat this little hand pump back in there. Now what you want to do is actually put the connectors on first, not those, not that pipe work. So I'm just putting a little bit of silicone grease on those O-rings. I have actually got new O-rings, but I'll see how I get on with those. They probably should be okay. So like I say, bringing the electrical part down first, because I actually originally connected the pipes, and then those connectors wouldn't fit underneath the pipes. So make sure you get all those in first, and then you can bring the return pipe in and clip it onto that framework as you go along. So they're all going in quite nicely with the silicone grease on, and then we can just put the little spring clips in and secure those all in position. Like I say, a lot of things here could leak, so hopefully nothing will once this is all back together. So then you've got the 3 screws that need to go in, so that's a 10mm socket for those. Obviously don't tighten them up too much. I'm not sure on the torque on them. I would have thought it's probably about 10 or something. Okay, and then we can just bring the wiring loom over now and start connecting things up at the front of the engine. Just tuck that in, like so. Okay then, so the next job is to refit the vacuum pump. So I just included another couple of photos here to remind ourselves what the vacuum pump looks like, because there is obviously a couple of rubber seals on there and a little gauze filter. So I'm going to be doing one of my usuals, which is instead of replacing the seals, which would be the easy and sensible option, I've cleaned them with a bit of brake cleaner and I'm gonna try and paint a little bit of RTV sealant on there as a effective and cost-cutting exercise. I have to give my car every opportunity to leak oil as much as it can, but hopefully it'll work. Like I say, I need to play things cool here because I don't know whether this engine's actually going to work, and if I spend too much money on parts, it could in theory be all money I've lost down the drain. So I'm just trying to see if this engine's actually going to run before spending money on it. So anyway, so we'll get these two fasteners in, and we need to torque these to 18 Newton meters. So that's a 10mm socket. Like so. So there we are, 18 Newton meters. The RTV should seal that okay, and as long as I didn't get any in the gauze which would block it, I think it should be fine.
Then 5 degrees.
And then 5 degrees. So that's a very tiny angle. So I'm going to completely guess that as being there and there. And then all I've got to do is connect the pipe on there for the brake master cylinder. So that should give us our vacuum for the brakes. Well, hopefully. Quite an important part, really. Okay then, so now to refit the oil separator. So, unusually for me, I'm actually going to replace the seal. Well, it actually sort of came in the kit with some other parts, so I probably wouldn't have replaced the seal, and probably would have popped a bit of RTV sealant on there and hoped for the best. But anyway, so we've got a new seal, so we'll pop that in there. So this one shouldn't leak. Just tuck that in. Right, so now on the surface there was a little bit of damage, so I will smear some RTV over some of the slightly damaged areas of the aluminium. So I'll get the 2 bolts out that I put in last week just to hold that manifold down for this moment. So I'll just get those out of the way, and then I'll take the tape off. And like I say, there is a couple of little scores. There's one there, little score there in the aluminium from when I was scraping away. So I'll just smear a little bit of RTV on that. That should just fill that slight little damaged area there. And so I'll put the oil separator now, line that up. Right, so now I think this is tightened to 10 Newton meters with an 8mm socket. So I was actually struggling to find the torque setting for this. Now, since the manifold is also 10 Newton meters, I'm going to assume this would be 10 as well, because I couldn't find out any other information. So I was obviously looking for the torque settings for the oil separator and couldn't find that. So like I say, I'm going to go with 10 Newton meters because the inlet manifold is. I would have thought 10 was probably about right anyway. So I'll work from the middle and gradually work outwards, like you should do. So hopefully that would be all okay. Right then, so now to refit the air filter housing. So mine is actually somewhat damaged, but there's a previous photo of it in position so that we know again how it's supposed to look. So I think there's normally some rubber cushions on all of this, and my one doesn't seem to have any of those left. So I think these would have been sort of, you'd have put a bit of silicone grease on those, and that would have helped just push it into the rubber location points. Like I say, nothing there on mine. It's literally completely just hanging in there. So we'll put our connector on there for the air sensor. Right, so that's sort of tucked in there. Making sure that's actually clipped in. And then again, I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone grease on the rubber seals. I've cheated here. This will actually just push on. Normally you'd obviously take that spring clip off on the turbo, but it's on there, so. And then we just got to do the Jubilee clip up there with a 7mm socket. There we are. So that's that part. So it's all starting to come together now. All getting quite exciting. Right then, so now to refit the oil level dipstick. So this is nice and simple. I'm just going to put a bit of smear of silicone grease on that O-ring at the bottom, just to help the seal go in there, and hopefully also the silicone grease prolongs the life of the rubber as well, I believe. There we go, that's nicely in. And then that's a 10mm socket, and we just pinch that up hand tight. Right then. Okay then, so the next job is to now refit the auxiliary drive belt. Now again, I've got a bit of a broken tensioner on mine, which makes it a little bit more of a challenge, because normally you'd pull the tensioner back and lock it in with a pin. So I'm going to have to try and get this back up now. I'm going to use an adjustable just to try and hold it, because I'm going to get more leverage with adjustable, like so. That should just hold it there. So I can just bring the accessory belt in now. I'll thread that over the top of the alternator, and then round the back, obviously under the tensioner, then over the crankshaft pulley, and then around the air conditioning pulley. And then I can just take the tension off now, making sure that's all lined up. So that's now back on. So the spanner you would normally use though is 15mm, so just to show you, that's a 15mm spanner and it fits quite nicely. Right then, so now to refit the throttle body. Okay, so I'm back with my silicone grease again. So again, I'm just going to give a little smear of silicone grease inside that. Just helps it slide on there nicely. Just going to line it up. Obviously 3 screws, long screws, obviously hold this in position. So we'll try and get one of the screws in first, just at the top to hold it. There's 10mm socket for this. So I'm just doing that one up loosely, and then I'll pop the one underneath here, because obviously that needs to be tight to bring the throttle body in. If I tighten the top one first, it's going to then be pushing against that. So then we'll just get the side one in as well. So this definitely isn't moving anywhere. Okay, so we'll tighten that one. And then I'll just tighten the Jubilee clip there with a 7mm socket. Like so. And And then obviously I mustn't forget the actual turbo pipe. Pop that in there. Again, I've put a little bit of grease on there. So you need to sort of line that up. I'm going to have to guess that and presume it's in a straight ahead position. I'll start with straight ahead. And then 7mm again, just to tighten that up. Okay, so now we're on to connecting the wiring harness back up. So the first connection will be for the air intake manifold temperature sensor. Then it's the manifold absolute pressure sensor. And then clip the conduit back on, and then round to the front we've obviously got the two throttle controllers. Pop that one on and that one. Right then, so now we can follow the wiring down to the alternator. So make sure the alternator connections are all clean, because obviously you want a good connection there, because this is directly connected back to the battery. So what I'll do there is I'll just feed this wire down to the oil pressure sensor. We'll then get the power on there for the alternator. Pop our spring clip or spring washer back on, and the nuts, and tighten that with a 13mm socket. Not sure on the torque of that, so I shouldn't overdo that. Just gently hand tights, probably enough. Now obviously you've also got the sensor plug there for the alternator control to the ECU, and mine's actually broken, the clip's broken there, so I'm going to probably have to try and cable tie that in position. But anyway, so we'll get the connector now to the oil pressure sensor. Pop that in, and then just cable tie that up out the way and trim it tight. Okay, so that's all looking connected now. So finally, I mustn't forget the earth lead going to this engine mount. I've dropped the nut again there. Still dropping all the nuts everywhere. Retrieved that back now, and then tighten that with a 13mm socket. And that's all those jobs done for today. Okay, and here's some reference photographs. So we start here with the overview of the engine with all the diesel pipeworks. There we can see the EGR valve, and there's the numbering system to the fuel accumulator rail. There's our EGR Cooler, and there it is in position at the back of the engine. Obviously that red bracket's where the air filter goes into, and presumably has some rubber mounts in. Obviously it's missing on mine. So there's our vacuum pump with our little gauze filter and rubber seals. And there's our air filter showing the air mass meter connection there. Rubber gasket there on the oil separator, and there it is back in position. Also the vacuum pump and that. So those are the parts of the throttle body. And there's some more there showing some close-ups, and there's all the connections for the cable that goes to the front of the engine. And there's our connections there to those two sensors, and the throttle connectors at the front, and then down there obviously the oil pressure switch sensor and the alternator connections. Okay, and here's a thank you to Eric Bettencourt.
And just before we end this video, I'd like to give my thanks again to Eric Bettencourt in the USA for another very generous donation. I really appreciate that, Eric, and I just hope that I'm actually helping you mend your Mini for these donations. So thanks again, Eric, and have a good weekend.
So you've been watching refitting the fuel pipes, the throttle body and air filter, and obviously many other things on this 2009 MINI R56. So thank you for watching, and I hope this helps you maintain and service your car within your budget. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in June 2022, and I can be found on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter as Coats and Gators.